This is Melissa, and it is the 7th of September, 2025. I hope that you're all doing well. I wanted to point you to the website. First of all, I'll remind you that there is cuttingthroughthematrix.com. For years, Alan has had many websites, and I've kept that going and then added to that. So, cuttingthroughthematrix.com, .net, .us. And there is also Alan Watt, cuttingthroughthematrix.ca. Then there is the foreign language website. I encountered some, I'll just say, mystery censorship problems with the EU a little over a year ago. The site was down. I kept it updated, but it couldn't be seen. That went on for over a year, and I finally gave up on the EU, and it is now alanwattsentientsentinel.com, and that's where you'll find foreign language transcripts. So if you want Spanish, there's Russian, Polish, there's, a nice handful there. Then there's the Mirror site, and that is cuttingthrough.jenkness.com. I did a real history with Rodney, who's kept that Mirror site going for Alan and now for me for many years. I think it's at least 18 years. So since Alan has been gone, I have started other channels, and I've begun making, as many of you know, video representations of the talks and other things I do. So that's Alan Watt CTTM. That's YouTube. And there's Alan Watt CTTM on BitChute and Odyssey. And there are 2 channels on Rumble. And then there's X. And most recently, about 3 months ago, I started Cutting Through the Matrix on Substack. I say this because I mentioned to you that when they're asking for biometrics, I won't be supplying them, and that'll be that. And I heard from a few of you saying, oh, well, how long do you think that's going to be? And truthfully, I have no idea. I will keep going as long as I can. And what I don't think, unless there's some disaster, we never know what is in store for us, that it will be an all-at-once switch. I think that I may lose a platform, and because of whatever reason, censorship, or I just don't want to comply, but I'll have as many other things going as I can. And people have brought to my attention, Telegram bringing in new kinds of, let's just say not great tech that keeps an eye on us. And, migrating over to other places, or that they've heard some stories about Substack, or that they've heard, everybody knows what X is about. And I'll just say, I'm going to keep this going as long as I can, which doesn't mean that I might not go for more kinds of odd, out of the way, hard to find places if I think that those are safe, are gathering less data on me and on you. I don't know. I am not sure what lies ahead, but I will do as much as I can. So I started things that Alan would say, oh, social media is terrible, and don't go in, back in the day, he would talk about chat rooms or forums. These were the early tech. He'd say it's a waste of time. You could be talking to a bot or a sock puppet. And this is true. Now, I told this story, actually, when I did that real history with Rodney from the Jenkness Mirror site. I told the story of going into Sudbury with Alan. I think this was 2019. It might have been late 2018. But we had just learned that Rogers, who's an internet supplier, was finally able to offer Wi-Fi in our area, which was out in the country, remote. And yes, Alan didn't like Wi-Fi. You don't want to be bathed in it, smart this, smart that, connected. What I'm telling you are sacrifices. I don't want to call them compromises, but that Alan made in order to use the technology as long as he felt it was necessary. Remember, he would always say, I'll throw that computer out the window if I wasn't using it, and he would have. So we were at the Rogers store signing up for this, and we're sitting, he and I, next to each other across the desk from the Rogers agent, and the agent was telling us that there was a special offer that for X amount of months or whatever on their plan that they were putting in. I think the tablet was free and the cell phone was some reduced price. And I remember Alan listened to the sales pitch, and then he looked at me and said, what do you think? And I told Rodney when I was conveying this story to him, I remember thinking, who are you and what have you done with Alan? Because it was such an alien thing for him, And yet, I think if I had not had that cell phone, it might have made it very difficult for me to exit Canada in the middle of Operation C. It was definitely a tool that was quite useful to me. So I do have my line in the sand. I don't want my irises scanned for the purpose of doing this. Do I know that, there's facial recognition tech everywhere, that we're living under camera surveillance every time I go out? Yes, I know that. And more, it becomes a challenge to avoid some of these things. So, that's what I'm saying. I'll use it so you see me doing things that Alan didn't do in terms of social media, in terms of these platforms. And I've tried to be careful with them, but I've also tried to extend the reach as much as I can. I believe that my window is narrow. So you can also support me by a monthly subscription on Stripe, or by going over to Substack, seeing if you like that platform, then you can subscribe over there. These are possible ways to support me. You can also just send plain old-fashioned checks within the U.S. to CTTM, Post Office Box 815, Keene, Keene, Texas 76059, USA. And within the U.S., I also am on Cash App. And if I'm quick enough here, I can give you that hashtag, although it doesn't look like I'm quick enough. Okay, so I'm scrolling. I'm going to find it. Here it is. It is the $CTTMAW. And so there are a lot of ways to support me, and I hope that you will do that, because like I say, I think that for me, for all of us, really, time is short, because we are moving into a completely different system. Now, interesting thing here on this talk that I've chosen to go up, from September the 1st, 2019. This is, remember, pre-Operation C. And I've said this before, I'm sure I'll say it many times. I'm always just blown away by what Alan saw, how far ahead he saw, what he saw was coming, and he was always focused on the important things. So the title of this, the little rhyming title, The Banks of Think Tanks, Adventure of Our Future, Now Caged, Forlorn. The future was planned before we were born. And I'll say one other thing, which is I am playing around with some new technology. Again, just trying to make things more functional, quicker, smoother, better. And I'm not sure that I am on my final configuration of software and technology. I hope that the sound is okay for this particular intro. So on this talk from September the 1st, 2019, yes, Alan is talking about think tanks and how the world that we live in is planned so many years ahead. And I flipped over to his Cutting Through book, Volume 1, and that's on page 17. He's writing about this ancient priesthood. And he said, the conspiracy underground would have you believe it all started with 18th century France or the English Revolution. But the truth is we were hijacked long, long ago. And I find this so important to remember. You'll know that I've been talking for some weeks now about information overload. And I've been seeking this out in Alan's talks. He doesn't really go into that one today, but I have been listening to quite a few of his talks where he does go into that. And I said, I don't just bring you talks that I think that you will find useful, but it is for me as well. It's what I need to hear. And I heard from so many of you, and still do, but especially during the height of COVID, after Alan was gone, I heard from so many of you saying, I wish that he was here to make sense of this for me. And boy, did I know that feeling. Because what happened during Operation C is that we had something called the medical freedom movement, I think is a good umbrella term for it. And there was just flat out craziness. So much disinformation. So many theories being floated around. And so many people that, to me, were obviously authorized or controlled voices. I haven't said too much because I like to be careful, but I have said something about the horse breeder and bow tie man, and that just to me immediately got my what the youngsters used to call a spidey sense up, and that's how I reacted to some of these people on just an intuitive level. I just didn't feel there was, it wasn't right. But it has taken me a lot longer to come to the conclusion that all of the 99.9% of the so-called dissidents within that movement were on some way authorized, given a script, told what to say, where to show up, where to stand, and then they were filmed. I mean, it was interesting. I remember in the early days when RFK Jr. went to some kind of lockdown protest in Germany. And this was the first time that particular character was trotted out in such a international way, you might say. I think that's, so it's like, oh, okay, well, that's an interesting turn of events. And he had been associated with, Children's Health Defense or Defense Fund, whatever it was. What I'm saying is he's been positioned as a hero. And yet I could only see him as a member of a lineage. You'd almost call it American royalty. So I was always on the fence about him. But now, this last week, since this bizarro tweet of Trump's and, Pfizer coming to see him and telling him how wonderful their products were, that, an unpeer-reviewed, and the the outcome of this is that Trump is saying, I'm not so sure this is a good thing. So I remember that, Trump gave us Operation Warp Speed, and he's there at the, kind of critical phase of Operation C, and he's surrounded by, Tony, the assassin Fauci, and the Trump supporters are all saying, oh, he's just giving, he's getting bad advice he doesn't know, and how naive are we? And then whether the election was stolen or there was Russian interference or it was a, clean loss. I mean, I think I've said plenty of times what I think about the political system. And I know what Alan thought about it, and you do too. So it all looks like theater. And so here are a group of people. Trump's already lost the election. We've got Biden coming in, and there are some mandates happening at a Texas hospital, and there are protesters out, medical personnel in front of it saying, you can't mandate, and then there are people holding up this Trump sign. And I thought, don't they remember Operation Warp Speed? Can't they remember that this was a Department of Defense military operation from start to finish, top down? But they don't, or they don't put it together. He's still a hero. And so it was interesting, was it not, that Mr. Standing by Tony Fauci, Operation Warp Speed, chose someone like Robert F. Kennedy. Don't you think? And now we appear to be watching, well, it is, there's no appearance about it, it is theater. These hearings of RFK Jr., it's just theater. And he'll probably get thrown under the bus, with all of us who thought we were stomping our feet and holding up signs for medical freedom. So it's a big operation. It's coordinated from the top down. And there aren't heroes. If there are heroes, then it's you being a champion for yourself, and it's me being a champion for myself, knowing what my no is, okay? I can use the cell phone that Alan got, and I can have some social media presence until that doesn't work anymore. But my line in the sand is, I'm not going to, give you my iris scan to do that. Whatever your line in the sand is, whatever your no means no is, you are your own champion. You've got to be your own hero here. Because I can tell you that this whole medical freedom and everyone who is associated with it are actors. It's a fraud. It's a fraud that has been perpetrated on us. And one of the red flags for me early on was, okay, here's so-and-so, and I don't want to do a lot. I don't want to, drop names. I just don't. But here's so-and-so, and they've got a background in pharmaceuticals or whatever. Just pick something that made them an expert. So they come out as a whistleblower or a dissident doctor or, whatever their expertise is, and they tell you in their little field of expertise why the what that you get in your arm is bad or toxic. When this person says why it wasn't created like they said it was, and this person over here, see what I'm saying? And they do that for, a couple of years. And then some of these people, all of a sudden, next thing I know, they're an expert. in geopolitics or the philosophical movements behind geopolitics. And at first I thought, because I like to give people the benefit of the doubt, that I think is a failing, frankly. At first I thought, well, they're trying to make themselves viable, you know? And sorry to be cynical, but they got a good little income there on their various platforms, and they didn't want the money flow to stop. And so how can they reinvent themselves? But that's not what was happening at all, I think now. What I think was that these people were positioned, they may have been chosen 10 years, depending on their age and where they were from, 10 years before the event. They might have been chosen at the event or during the event, but then somehow they're picked up a little bit, groomed, positioned, and that now they've got a following. Now they have people who believe they really were for them, the little guy, about whatever it was. And so then the little guy who heard him say, well, masks are ineffective, is going to follow them no matter what they say. If they're touting universal basic income or saying, that's the only way that we're going to be able to handle AI. You see, the expertise just grows and grows and grows. It morphs from one thing to the other. And you know why? It's because they're given a script and they follow their script. They're told how to perform in this theater. And so that's how I see it. That's how I see it. And it is on the one hand, it's bleak, but on the other, these are the kind of things that Alan was pointing out slowly and patiently over and over again. And he didn't lose that train of thought ever, which is, this is an ancient brotherhood. It's a deviant priesthood. The new priesthood is science. And we are the most studied animals on the face of the earth. They know how we tick. They've got it, gamed out. It's war gamed out. What are you going to do? Well, we have the direction. If you go this way, we've got that. If you go that way, we've got this. It's figured out. So, but again, I actually don't find that little thing that I just shared with you to be depressing. I find it liberating, and I think that when you are no longer lying to yourself or holding out hope that somebody's got your back or somebody's coming to rescue you, then you start to put together your own solutions and you start to see things for what they are. And that's really the beginning. That's the true beginning of waking up, if we want to call it that. Everything else is just reacting. It's just reacting to the latest indignity or horror. And the other morning, I was thinking about how important it was to be without hope as almost the foundation that you have to have in order to get anywhere. And I was working on a few things, physically up and about. And when I came back to my desk, I saw that someone had sent me a message, and they had sent me a Substack article entitled "A Field Manual for the Fallen: Navigational Imperatives for the Post-Truth Wasteland." And I'll just read you a little bit of the beginning and then skip down to something else. They start off. You see, the first part was easy, the crash, the great unlearning, kicking your way out of the amniotic sac of the official narrative and taking that first searing breath of real air, yes, a purity. Watching the cardboard sets burn down around you, you stand there in the rubble, a survivor, laughing like a madman at the sheer cosmic audacity of the lie. You think, that's it. I'm through. I've escaped. But that's the trap, you understand. That's just stage one. The detonation is the overture. The real, grinding, soul-crushing horror comes later in the quiet that follows the blast. It's the long, silent twilight of the after, when the adrenaline fades and you look around at the smoking crater that used to be your world, and a new, far more venomous question begins to poison your blood. Now what? So, skipping way down to now what? See, I give you the good parts if you want to get the meat of it, though, or get the good parts, the appetizer and dessert. See things as they are, not as you want them to be. You have to cauterize the part of your brain that craves comfort. You have to strangle hope. Hope in the post-conspiracy wasteland is a poison. It's the opiate that the system still pumps through the air to get you to lie back down and accept the next set of shackles. The hope that some politician will save you. The hope that there's a secret plan being worked behind the scenes by white hat heroes. The hope that things will just magically get back to normal. Bothersome stuff. Well, the writer didn't say bothersome stuff, but bothersome stuff, all of it. That's the old world programming trying to coax you back into the prison you just escaped. Normal is gone. The saviors are not coming. The plan is a fairy tale for children who are afraid of the dark. The only thing you can trust is the evidence of your own eyes and the cold, hard, logical conclusions you can draw from it. So he goes on to write, you have to adopt the mindset of a combat detective arriving at a horrific crime scene. You do not impose a theory. You do not hope the victim is just sleeping. You collect evidence, you look at the blood spatter, you analyze the trajectory of the bullet, you follow the ugly facts wherever they lead, especially when they lead somewhere you desperately do not want to go. This world demands that you become a brutal, unflinching empiricist. If it feels bad, but the facts support it, it is true. If it feels good, but the facts contradict it, it is a lie. Full stop. This is the new morality. It is a morality of perception. And I will post that. You can read it yourselves. I will say, though, that I always got from Alan that, perceptions are more than just the five senses. We have a lot, as he would say, we're much more powerful than they would have us know. So we have to reclaim that, and we have to be our own champions. Because I am increasingly convinced that this data overload, these experts that come out on all levels of truthers, alternatives, dissidents, freedom fighters, whatever we or they want to call themselves, this is actually a technique. Ooh, look what they know. I'll never know that. And it overwhelms and it disables. And this is a strategy from the top down. So since Alan is talking about think tanks, I just wanted to mention one that I covered a couple of years ago in some great depth. The listener pointed out the Aspen Institute, and yes, Alan had mentioned them before, but he hadn't covered them really thoroughly in the way that he did Royal Institute of International Affairs or Council on Foreign Relations. And so I thought, I'll jump in there and see what that's about. And so if I can find some of the Not Sure articles that went with that, I'll post them. But let me just say that the Aspen Institute is huge, and it has several layers to it. The front-facing, most obvious layer is the layer that works with communities and high schools and community colleges and universities, and they find young leaders. And in much the way that in the UK you had Common Purpose, it's empowering young leaders, giving them a direction, giving them talking points. What's important? Well, I can tell you what's important according to the Aspen Institute, and that is the climate, right? The weather. But just to give you an idea of all of the tentacles they have, these are just some programs. Now, remember, this is the front-facing part of the Institute. They've got the arts program, the Aspen Challenge, the Aspen Community Programs, Aspen Digital, Aspen Economic Strategy Group, Aspen Forum for Community Solutions, Aspen Global Innovators, Aspen Global Leadership Network, Aspen Institute Latinos in Society, Aspen Leadership Seminars, Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs, Aspen Policy Academy, Aspen Strategy Group, Aspen Words. Now, Aspen Strategy Group, we're getting into the meat there. And I may come back to that for a moment. Then, okay, so it's alphabetical order. I'm done with Aspen. The Center for Native American Youth, Business and Society Program, College Excellence Program, Community Strategies Group, Congressional Program, Criminal Justice Reform Initiative, Economic Opportunities Program, Education and Society Program, Energy and Environment, Financial Security, Food and Society, Health Medicine Society, Philanthropy and Social Innovation, Philosophy and Society, Religion and Society, Science and Society, Socrates Program, Sports and Society. Okay, I'm bored. Now, the Board of Trustees, this is interesting, and I pointed this out in one of the Not Sure pieces, but the chair of the Aspen Institute Board of Trustees, co-founder and executive chair of the Community Food Navigator, whatever that is Margot L. Pritzker. You will find that the Pritzker family from Chicago was behind Barack Obama, very well connected. Now then, you've got, I might say, definitely a more important wing of the Aspen Institute is the Security Forum. And that is a veritable who's who of people in private and retired from politics and current in politics, including Condoleezza Rice, Antony Blinken. And I won't give you a huge list. I'm just going to scroll down to tell you that Penny Pritzker of the Pritzker family is also a member of the Aspen Strategy Group. Tom Pritzker is a member of the Aspen Strategy Group. So, oh, well, look, right next to the Pritzkers is David Petraeus, and he's a former director of the CIA. So this is a huge kind of think tank with as an umbrella over a few NGOs. It's a very important player in what is going on in the world. And I also want to mention that I'm going to just link to, the CEO of the Aspen Institute for a number of years was Walter Isaacson. Harmless man, right? He's the biographer of Albert Einstein and Jennifer Doudna of CRISPR and Elon Musk. So he is, let's put it this way, a star maker. And he keeps it in front of you. What should you be thinking about? Who are the stars? And we follow the stars. So that too is Aspen Institute. But I wanted to mention about the Pritzker family that I will link to a woman, a writer by the name of Jennifer Bilek, who has covered in great detail the connections of, I think her name, it's another Jennifer, is Jennifer Pritzker, who is a trans and has given millions and millions of dollars to universities all over the U.S. for promotion of trans this, trans that. So I think I've said enough for tonight, and I don't say it to overwhelm. I think that what's been going on here in this country this week with these hearings on RFK Jr. is so obviously theater. We may well see him thrown under the bus, and that is going to get all of you who thought he was your hero and he was doing something good by, getting food coloring out of your food and you point to some of the things that he's done, the firing of the, taking away this amount of money for these mRNA, okay. But theater. Because all it would take is putting another person in to just undo that in what they used to call a New York minute. Well, have a good week. Thanks for bearing with me as I've gotten so far behind on everything, including content and emails and you name it. When I say give up hope, I mean that in the best possible, most optimistic way. Because when you reach a place where you are no longer hopeful that someone else is going to fix this, or that it's just bad Trump and this bad administration, or it's just the deep state, or it's just we all have to look outside our own countries, outside of nationalism, because it's, we studied, that famous quote, the political operative under Clinton, we're history's actors, and study us judiciously, if you will. I'm paraphrasing, I don't have it up in front of me. So we judiciously study them, and he says, and while you're doing that, we're doing the next thing. It's back to that article. It's when you've given up hope that you can really see things as they are. And that is the only hope that you have, is to see things as they truly are, from as high a bird's eye Alan Watt perspective as you can get. Take care.
Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 1st of September 2019. I'd like to hope that everybody had a good enough summer. Now we're into fall, and last year, in fact, I had snow starting in September. It's one of the shortest summers I've had actually, and because of global warming I've had more months of snow right up until the end of May pretty well. June, July, August, and you're back into September for more snow again. So that's the effects of global warming, apparently. And it's all our fault, as I've noticed again today, sitting outside for an hour or so, looking at the sky and watching them spraying and spraying all over the place and turning it all into quite a mush it was. But again, that's just them trying to save us all from ourselves. It's pretty comical in a sense to look back to, for instance, the 1990s, when talking about the chemtrails that were coming down at the time, 1998 in Ontario. It really started on a regular basis then. They'd been trying it out beforehand, but they were doing it every day starting 1998. Very low level too, and across the sky, very evident science fiction type stuff when you walked out the door. And yet people back then had to have it pointed out to them. And again, it ties in with the fact that most folk wait for the media to do their thinking for them, and they'll ignore what they see or hear or know what they've noticed. If the media doesn't say anything about it, they really expect the media to be appendage to their brain and do the reasoning for them, like Brzezinski said. And it's very sad but true. It's startling too, even when you test it out on people and you find out that is the fact. They really expect to be warned about things that are harmful to them by authority figures. So if they don't get it, they ignore it. It's rather stunning, really. And so many of the things we talked about back then, such a long time ago, and yet it's a blur since then, because it's been non-stop, but go, so many shows, and giving talks about all the kinds of things that were happening, and watching them all come to pass, all the things you'd predicted, not because you were psychic in a sense, but because you'd read so much of the documentation of the people at the United Nations, for instance. You read the monotonous stuff, and it is monotonous. It's written bureaucraties. Bureaucraties is meant to make you switch off, but if you can struggle through it, you'll understand what they're really getting at. And it's for government departments across the world. They immediately take all the big think tanks' projections of things to do for coming catastrophes, etc., and they put it into action, generally quietly. And it's never for the reasons that they actually tell you. Again, you have to go back to the early writings of many of the people in this big remaking program, remaking of the planet and everything in it and everybody in it, going way back into the true socialistic systems of the 19th century into the 20th century, where they were rather blatant about it. It's very blatant, in fact, about wanting to create that, or create the perfect beings for the planet. And the old people, according to eugenics, must die off, and like Darwinian types of obsolescence for old type of humans. They should have the evolved type would have to go on into a future, and of course, evolution would eventually be brought about by scientific findings for those who were in charge of it all. And you watch it happening, and you remember the predictions too, where before Adolf Hitler came along and got the blame for all eugenics, because he just copied it from Britain and the US, the whole idea of eugenics and social hygiene and all this kind of stuff. They got it. That's where they got it from, and he actually mentioned it. Everyone's happily forgotten about it, but Julian Huxley kept it going, the whole idea, with UNESCO. By renaming different, creating new terminology for the same old things of too many people, too many of the wrong people, and projections of mass overpopulations of, again, what he would call the wrong people. And today, they're back at it again, back in the open about it, really, and they're trying to say that's all of you, you see. If you're not a somebody today, then you're obsolete. And that's what they're really telling you. If you're not a somebody, you're just to obey the ever-encroaching authoritative commands of the authoritative system, which is less and less appearing democratic. It never truly was democratic, but in their own writings at the Club of Rome, they make lots of jokes about it, because they never believed in democracy, but they did believe they would have to use the term democracy for a long time to get the people to comply and go along with so many of the things which they've been pushing. So you have a very thin veil of democracy today, but in reality it's going full tilt at the next phase of perhaps even a form. Interestingly, I was reading one of the books from the Club of Rome, and they were going through all the different forms of usefulness in governance, different types. They can use it for different types in an agenda, for instance, or a society's evolution. And they went through all the different kinds of, including tyrannies and tyrants and dictators. And it's so interesting to see the Club of Rome play the two sides of things, because before, many of the people at Club of Rome were the ones that got people into wars, world wars even, with their ideas, and then they blame everybody for fighting in the wars, which they often helped to start in a sense. But because wars are very useful for change. Carroll Quigley said it too. He said, if you want quick change, fast change, you can get more done on a social level, meaning changing all of society, views, opinions, and even ways of living. You can do more in 5 years of war than 50 years of peace and propaganda. So don't forget these things. War is very useful for changing sides, and changing all sides, I should say, and the opinions of all sides, because all parties involved in a war will change. It doesn't. You don't go to. People are brainwashed to believe you go to war to retain something, or your culture. That's what they used in World War II. And as an example, Britain went into World War II. This entity or corporation called Britain, or the UK, into World War II, using propaganda. They all use propaganda of saving their culture against a tyrant and saving democracy, etc. So they went to fight National Socialism. And at the end of World War II, they emerged as a National Socialistic country. Really interesting. And of course, with so many different laws on the books, etc., to change their culture drastically, in fact, till you see what it is today. It's constantly changing. You can't even say it's a fixed culture at all anymore. There's hardly a remnant of the old system there. You've got to understand what gives you culture and what keeps you together as a society, rightly or wrongly. But you always have a strong commonality of culture with common beliefs and common rights and wrongs. You understand it all perfectly well. And you need very little police when you have a culture and a society like that, because the people self-police, the culture self-police themselves, and things which are wrong are generally very evidently wrong, and so you can keep it all in check. So if you want to destroy culture, you must knock down all the things that made it strong. And you can do it by pretending to help people. That's the greatest tactic of all. For instance, the UK... the people in the UK never had it good for an awful long time, for centuries really, since the big central banking system took over and they could tax people's income, and all the different goods and services and so on that happened inside a country were taxed to pay off what you could then call national debt. So governments could then borrow from a central bank for their wars, to pay for the wars, so the corporations could get all the profit abroad, you see, by taking resources of countries. But they wanted the public back home to pay for it all. That's really what it was all for. And as blunt as that, and it's as truthful as that. The people pay for the armies, they supply the military, the people for the uniforms, and they go off and fight these wars, and then they pay for it all. And the countries that were taken over under the British Empire, you paid for the railroads get put across India and different countries too, so that the resources could get moved out of the country for the big corporations that had been there since the East India Corporation, at least. So central banking was awfully handy, and then you put it down to debt, a national debt, and then the people had to pay it all off in taxes one way or another. And after World War I, that decimated Britain. They never had peace, remember, for centuries, war after war after war, right into a Great Depression after World War I, rationing World War I, depression, and they never really had a return to full employment after that, because other countries, including Germany, were vastly outstripping Britain in manufacturing, and they were awfully good at it in Germany. The people who ran Britain were so stingy. They wanted things maximum profit, and which means it's very simple. You either get the cheapest labor, they don't put their heart into things, and you won't really care so much when you get really cheap labor about what you're doing, or else you reduce the materials and the products that you're making, so they're not as good. But Germany put a lot of more money into less profit, so they were outstripping Britain. So Britain really went into a tremendous depression, and yet during that whole time, up until World War II, that lasted, the depression, And then after World War II, they had massive social programs. They even have documentaries, or they used to have up on YouTube years ago, on the propaganda they used for the British folk at the end of World War II. It was done in a park, and there's a guy sitting on a bench, and the park keeper comes along and starts pointing out how much percentages of his pound note, for his pay, has to go to this, and so much for that, and so much for that, all for the British debt. So the people still had democracy, remember. They fought, and they were told to go off and fight for their way of life. And people will fight for anything which they know. What you know is your way of life. Even if you're living in poverty, you'll generally go off to fight it, because what you're taught is that the people who might conquer you are going to be 10 times worse than people who already own you. That's the way it really truly is. And so they'll fight for it, but they will fight for each other, you see, because they are the real culture. The people themselves are the real culture. And so they'll fight to try and retain that. Afterward, the wars, it was all destroyed. They were left, a lot of them, destitute. They were in rationing right through into mid-50s, 1950s. Their health was very poor compared to other countries. And the employment that they had really was almost subsistence wages for a long time. So you get used and abused for empires and so on. And don't forget, during that whole time, there was a group in London, the Royal Institute for International Affairs, which emerged from the British Empire leaders like Lord Alfred Milner, who were quite blatant about the Britain, this entity. They had a different idea of the Corporation of Britain, which they ruled over, and the Empire as well, the British Empire, than people who lived in them. The people, the ordinary folk, a completely different notion of what it was. And they wanted a system that would rule the world with the same kind of British parliamentary system, which is a good front system, really, but subservient to the Queen or the King, depends who's in power. When you read the books put out by the leaders, or the owners, you might say, of this system that existed in the British Empire at that time, you'll find they're very explicit in their ideas about the public. The public were a different species almost to them in every country. It was really so marked, which is really upsetting to a lot of people. They want to believe the old BBC dramas that they kept putting on, that somehow an elite would have some kind of affinity and even some kind of emotional affinity with the public that they ruled over. And really, it wasn't like that at all for most of them. They were distinctly removed from the peasantry. They wrote for themselves, their own classes. And above that too, they wrote for the selected ones from the upper classes who worked in the societies like that one that became the Royal Institute for International Affairs in the US of the CFR. And they have a branch too for the Pacific Rim region too, with players in Australia and New Zealand and China and Japan, by the way. So they were setting up the future world empire. But what gets you, what strikes me when I look into the old volumes of rapidly disappearing material, written for their own people, almost intergroup publications, is the similarities of today, with so many think tanks working for them on all aspects of the economies, transport, the psychologies of the peoples, the classes of the peoples, the genders, all these things, and study upon study, well over 100 years old, right up to the present time. The data accumulated by this has been used by them to an incredible extent for change, of course, planned change across the whole planet. And you can see why they couldn't disclose this stuff to the public, the general public, because they need you to go along with it in all phases of their great plan, the grand plan, you might call it. Otherwise, you wouldn't go along with it. If you all knew, if your parents knew that your society was just to be utterly destroyed by a Gramsci-type scenario, the communist, who says, instead of just fighting people physically and so on, he says, just come in and gradually take over the functions of culture, step by step, and education step by step, and so on, and media, and you can convince the public as they're growing up that and before you know it, in a generation or so, you've completely altered what they were by design, by plan. And so a socialistic, almost communistic type system or way of using techniques was implemented on the public without them even being aware of that's what was happening. They were trained to believe they were fighting communism. But in reality, it was being taught in universities in the Western world, taught openly. And they were recruiting openly too for big changes ahead. The public can't quite get, and most folk today can't get their head around that. Why would your country be fighting communism and yet promoting and even funding its tuition? It's because down the road, you always, through the Hegelian process, you have a synthesis. Remember, you need two sides for change. One side changing you all the time is a tyranny, you see. And if you have two sides, then you think you're fighting a tyranny, and then if you guide the synthesis, basically, you get thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. So synthesis is the outcome of the two. So if you guide that along the way, and you guide the arguments, you'll get society to always move in the direction that you want. And you can convince them of pretty well anything by using the right techniques of how to live, how to behave, what's okay, what's acceptable, what isn't acceptable, and keep changing normals all the time until you've got new normals across the board. You can also train them through incredible indoctrination. It's so slickly done that people don't know they're even being indoctrinated through entertainment. Until, in a Pavlovian sense, they'll have incredible reactions if you mention certain even words to them. They'll blush and go into almost, panic if they hear certain terms used and things like that. So it's quite easy to indoctrinate children. Like Bertrand Russell said, give me children young enough, and he said, I could convince them that snow is actually black. Just change the terminology. And if you change terminology, that was a communistic system of using terminology. The Weather Underground were using it to create the terminology, force the public to use the terms, and then when the public try to use the terms, you're accusing them of something, and the public try to use them, it's quite easy for you to disable them by calling them something else or a name or whatever it happens to be. It silences them totally. And we're seeing that all the day as though it's quite natural. And it's working, of course, as it's meant to work. So, as I say, the techniques of this go way back into the 19th century, really. And improved with mass communication and mass study on the public. And since the internet came out, there's never been a time of rapid learning on behalf of those who observe us, monitor us, analyze us, etc., and with the use of computers. And they don't have to even use as much time on the public. With algorithms that they're rather perfect today, they can actually suss out different people's communications and categorize you all in real time very quickly, boom, 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 any pigeonholes. And that's what governments are all using across the board. And it won't get better. It won't get better at all, because they're using algorithms now, and lots of scientific papers where eventually computers, the computerized system, and artificial intelligence will be running your lives and making the decisions not just on your behalf, but for you, whether you like it or not, in a very authoritative fashion. And it'll be harder, you see, if you've been targeted for because of your social credit system being not up to par, or you've got opinions that a tyrannical government doesn't like, then you're going to have a hard time of it. You'll have no humans to contact to complain about something. They'll just say, well, it's all done by computer, but it's out of our hands. It's perfect, isn't it? Who are you going to complain to? It's quite amazing to me, because if you can't have opinions, and you don't have to be violent with your opinions, you just have to have opinions. You don't have a free society. In a free society, you've got all kinds of opinions. People will get upset, and you'll get upset yourself at times. But that's what freedom is. If you're forced into a singular technique under the guise of keeping the peace or whatever it happens to be, you're in a Soviet-type system, because they were imprisoning people under psychiatric terms for years. There's books out on it. They called it, you were inflexible. You were socially inflexible in your opinions. And that was a mental illness, you see. And you couldn't complain about the system of communism because it was obviously the most perfect utopia in the world, as it was taught to everybody, you see. You must be mad if you didn't like it. We're seeing the same techniques used across the world now. And China is using it to a really good effect with their social credit system. There's some good publications out on it now in good detail on how it's used on the people. And really, a few literally have broken one of the taboos there. They're not crimes, they're taboos, but because they're taboos, like a thought of something, or not quite up there, or worshipping the party's stance on whatever it happens to be, you'll get blacklisted, and you can't even travel in. You can't even go through doors in a library or in all. There is banned from them all automatically, and that's coming, of course, to the West too. For those who haven't picked up on it, it's so interesting, as I've said before, of the warnings we had back in the 80s and the 90s of what was to come, when people could put out good scientific projections from good sources on the dangers of all of this coming computerization and data collection and so on. Most folk, again, because they're nice people, would say, we understand that could be done, but they, it's almost the they word, meaning authorities, they would never do the nasty things to us. But why wouldn't they do that? Power. You have to, again, just like the Royal Institute for International Affairs, who saw the people under them vastly different from the people who live inside a population. We really had affinity with each other. They had no affinity, that class. They really didn't have any affinity with anything below them. And they thought that was the natural order. They really believed it. It's the same thing with those in charge of technology today. They truly believe they're like gods because they're up there and they have the money and the power and the ownership of big corporations over systems which they've made essential in today's society. They've made it essential. Governments now demand you pay taxes on computers now, and so on, rather than just send them checks. And you're being forced into a system to use this system. So if you start to get banned from that system or punished or from the system, well, you're going to be in dire straits, even to get money or to get bills paid or wherever it happens to be. That's part of the social credit system. The very system that again, Lord Bertrand Russell talked about in the 40s and 50s, when he said eventually a system would come in where the central authority, which would be presumed could be sort of a governmental authority, it doesn't have to be government. If you notice, most government today is farmed out to agencies. And if they put out a credit system, like a moneyed system, a credit system for everyone in the future, getting away from the so-called free enterprise system, which is never free and it's only enterprising for a few. In reality, if they put out a rationing system down the road, which they want to do, by the way, after the next crash, and it's not surmising on my part, it's from publications from many of the big think tanks on this. They want to do this. It's always been their goal. Russell said, it'll arrive into your bank accounts one day and you can't save them up. So you have to use these credits. It'll be the same every month. And if you've been bad, and I mean bad by being antisocial, meaning you haven't conformed to whatever opinion or whatever it happens to be for that week or month, then they'll ban you from using it or withdrawing from it. And at the end of the month, by the way, even if you are supposedly good in quotation marks, you can't save any of it up. You got to use it on the month, or it starts in the same amount of money or credits every month. When you read the books by Bertrand Russell, remembering that he belonged to a lot of global think tanks in his day, which implemented policies for the future, talking about a universal credit system issued by the government, and then you see the implementation of testing systems across the world now of universal basic income, models by the government, you realize that the present was planned about 70 years ago in many different areas, not just in that one. This is all old planning that you're seeing come into play now as we wait for the next big crash. Crashes are planned, and they're consented to by those in charge of it all. Money's backed by nothing. If they wanted to go on for another 100 years this way, they would just make, well, in 100 years you'd be earning a few $1 million a year each. But you'll be living in a system where it'll be quite a few $1,000s for a cup of coffee, etc., as they inflate the currency, make it worth less and less and less. But we've already lost over 40% of the value of the dollar purchasing power since 2007 and 8, where the last crash came. That was what they called an adjustment. So now you need almost, $1.50 to get the same amount of money, basically. It's the same amount of purchasing power and buying things, the same items. And it's quite evident to everybody, you almost need $2 now for every one that you used to have, especially in foods and areas like that. And that was agreed upon. And I even read articles on the air at the time, back then, from the newspapers that were, when they used to have journalists that were assigned to parliaments and that published the stuff that we're talking about. But they said that was the plan. They'd inflate the currency. They gave the okay, in fact, almost an order to all energy. Now, food is an energy for folks, don't forget it. And electricity and all kinds of heating, all to go up in price. Because that's the big global agenda, to start restricting our use of energy. Because the whole point of the global warming nonsense and so on, all this stuff, is right in your face today from the big think tanks, rather openly. There's too many of you. You're the problem. And global warming, climate change, and sustainability is what they used under pretense of taking control of everything and society and your life and even marriage or offspring or having offspring or the right to have offspring, all into the hands of authorities. They're quite blatant about it. I'm not making this up. This is not conspiracy stuff. I don't talk about conspiracy stuff. I use the facts that come out from the newspapers and from the think tanks and their magazines and their own publications from universities, etc., etc., etc. There's nothing to guess here. People who want to believe that you're being taken care of in this almost maternalistic system somehow, you forget it. It's not paternalistic or maternalistic. It's authoritative now, and it's ready to go with the next crash. It's ready to go and show you that you can't go on like this. They keep telling you that, again, in this last week, all the publications are going the same stories about overpopulation and statistics on the population expected growth from different countries. Africa, they say, is going to be terrible, etc., etc. Meanwhile, they still say, like they've said every year for the last 20, 30 years, the population in the West is declining. So we're being good and having less children. But because of it, they say you've got to bring more people in to take care of the elderly. This is the excuse they give you, as the whole world is being turned upside down and moved around and so on. But again, they want you to eat insects now. Again, they revived that whole thing and get you off high-protein diets under the guise that we just can't go on with the farming the way it is. The farming, folks, has been cut back for many, many, many years with licensing and taxations and different restrictions have been put into place. I've got articles here and government declarations from the 40s and 50s on the need to eventually reduce and restrict farming. So don't believe what they're telling you at all. The whole problem is you, they claim. And you either have the right stuff in you or the wrong stuff. Just going back to a great hero of the physicists and the scientific societies, a descendant of Darwin, of course. And it was the next million years by Charles Galton Darwin, the physicist who worked on a good helper of society. He worked on the Manhattan Project with other folk. They helped to murder lots of people. That's what they do, these people that we look up to, it seems to be. And he talks about the future. remember, this is the 1950s. He was pushing all this stuff. And eugenics, in a time, as I say, where folk were reeling from the whole philosophy of National Socialism of Germany at the time, which Hitler had copied from the Cold Spring Harbor project in the States, Rockefeller, and the ones in Britain, the Darwin Institute and so on. He copied all that stuff, you see, from them. But again, we're awfully good at deciding who are the people we're going to hate are going to be, you know. And when it happens again, it's done under a good guise. It's to save us all. We have to reduce us to save us, you see. But, who's us? Well, you're already going sterile in the West for some strange reason. They don't really know, eh? They don't really, there's no crisis over it, like why it's happening, eh? Well, it's because they know why it's happening. Anyway, the next million years, in page 76, Charles Galton Darwin, the descendant of Charles Darwin and eugenics and so on, he said, it would surely be as wrong as the speculations of a natural philosopher of 2 centuries ago would have been about our present conditions. It may be noticed, however, that the biological sciences, which in the 19th century rather lagged behind the physical, are beginning to show promise of quite astonishing new advances. The proper consideration of these biological advances must, for the most part, be deferred to later chapters, but I may list some of them here without discussion. There is first the possibility of new sources of food. For example, if grass or wood could be rendered edible, it is safe to say that there would be immediately a great increase in the population of the world. What he's saying is if you have good food, folks, doesn't matter what it was made of, it's going to increase the population, which is the enemy of those who rule the world. But he says, then there is the probability that medical science will continue still further the great triumphs it can already claim in the conquest of disease. He says it is also not impossible that medical science might succeed in materially lengthening life without senility, though in a world of overcrowded population it's not very clear what would be gained. Now, I'll just stop here and say this, that's been in all the magazines and science and so on for quite a while now. Even this last week, they've got chips they can put in. They claim they can reconnect a lot of the pathways and the systems in the brain. And actually, just like I think the movie Johnny, was it Mnemonic? They're talking about giving you basically further capacity for learning through microchips in the brain itself, like a hard drive, where they can store the data. It's just astonishing how they program you through all the sci-fis until you think that's quite normal when it comes along, really. Well, remember all the other stuff they showed you in sci-fis, and you better pray that it doesn't happen. All the other nasty stuff. Anyway, it says here, looking a little deeper, there is a possibility of substantially altering the intellectual and moral natures of individuals, right? Intellectual and moral natures of individuals by some sort of hormonal injections. Already great effects have been produced on animals. Now that ties in with Bertrand Russell's. By means of diet, injections and injunctions, they could control the populations. Anyway, back to Charles Galton Darwin. Finally, as the most curious speculation of all, it's not quite impossible that it may be one day feasible to select in advance the sex of each child that is to be born. Well, that's all been done since then. Where the decision is made by the parents or by their rulers. This suggests the possibility of a great unbalance in the populations of the world. Before discussing these matters, it is necessary to look deeper into man's nature, and this will be the subject of the next 3 chapters. For those who haven't read his book, it's an easy enough read, actually, The Next Million Years. He's on to say it's quite non-moral and that there are many equalities and we by no means admire, which nevertheless are often regrettably effective in the struggle for life. All through the animal kingdom, one of the most successful roles is that of the parasite. And there are states of human society where such a parasite as a professional beggar is as successful as anyone else. Something of the kind is unfortunately true in Britain just now in the 1950s. The people we are really encouraging are not those that we think we are. In other words, they don't want them to breed to people who he saw as useless. Now, all this stuff is, he's just putting in a book what their think tanks have been collecting for them with studies.
And you spend your whole life just studying one area of all of this, for instance. It says, next million years, in page 93, it says, for a great many of the people who get good promotion are contributing less than their share to the next generation. At present, the most efficient way for a man to survive in Britain is to be almost half-witted, completely irresponsible, and spending a lot of time in prison, where his health is far better looked after than outside. On coming out with restored health, he is ready to beget many further children quite promiscuously, and these problem children are then beautifully cared for by the various charitable societies and agencies until such times as they have grown old enough to carry on the good work for themselves, meaning crime and so on. It is this parasitic type that is at present the most favoured in our country. If nothing is done, a point will come where the parasite will kill its host by exhaustion, and then of course itself perish miserably and contemptibly through having no one to support it. Now, all this kind of technique is discussed by the communistic systems, and Gramsci too, of taking down nations. Again, get back to dialectic. And believe you me, Charles Galton Darwin was perfectly aware of the dialectic, and that the group he belonged to often ran both sides of things. You create the problem, then they use their own press, they point at the problem, right? Create it first, point to it, get everybody feeling bad and guilty for existing, yet they're using the worst types as examples, but everybody will then feel guilty. Well, how much am I contributing to society? Doing my little pathetic job, etc., etc. This is how it's done, folks, for those who don't catch on to it. The rulers, and he came from a line of rulers that boasted about the fact that they were a scientifically bred family for science itself on behalf of the dominant minority that ruled. And Julian Huxley, who was also related to them all, the same group, talked about that. So he was perfectly aware, Charles Galton Darwin, of their particular management of all different kinds of sides here. And he's saying the same things as Lord Bertrand Russell, the great Lord Bertrand Russell, who kept using the same kind of examples, but then pointing to the rest of society as just useful, not even the ones who are working on lowly jobs, as almost obsolete types altogether. You'll find the same thing in George Bernard Shaw, in Man and Superman, in his writings about the socialist system that he was all part of, where they would, just like the communists did, slaughter millions of what they would call useless eaters. And he said that you'd have to be adaptable for a new scientific age, and a man would have to be able to literally fix and understand vehicles like motor cars and stuff like that, and other things too, and adapt. Those who couldn't adapt should be extinct, because that's a Darwinian principle of evolution, they claim, and eugenics. So we're living through it, folks. Now, the people who write this stuff and work and meet in the big global meetings about it, they're not having a hobby club when they get together and discuss these things. They're dead serious, and they draft up different documentations. They've got whole bureaucracies that draft things up for them. At the WEF and all the other forums that they have and meetings that they have, and they have them implemented. They're not hobby clubs. I hope you understand that. When you read this stuff, stop saying, oh, they'll never do it. They always do what they say they're going to do. They always do. And if they have to find ways of terrifying you to comply, like sustainability or global warming, and it's all your fault, then they'll do it, and they use it. And they have no problem with that. The Club of Rome said that would fit the bill for this particular agenda. The same Club of Rome that doesn't believe in democracy, they believe, and one of the last books I read from them, in the right to even use dictators in the coming struggles and chaos that's planned, basically. I hope you know. This is not scaremongering. This is the stuff that they've been publishing. Read them. It's just fascinating. And no one's criticizing them, you'll notice, for coming out with all these incredible, to your mind, projections of things that must be done. And don't forget, even Gorbachev was a member on the Club of Rome's body. I think he still is. He was the president of the Soviet Union at one time, the head of it. Back to Charles Galton Darwin. I wasn't going to even touch him tonight, but since I just hit on it,
different classes of people into parasitical classes. Well, what happens when you become disabled? Through work too, you're now a parasite as far as you're concerned. Remember, the United Nations said as well that a good citizen, as they defined it, was someone who's a good producer and consumer, but not just one or the other. You have to be both. What happens when you're retired? Well, you're now a problem, you're a burden. It's like your bank balance, folks. If you put money into savings deposits in a bank, the bank lists you your deposit as a liability, not an asset. It's a liability. If ever a crash comes, you're a liability. You're going to lose it all anyway, and they'll claim it from you. But regardless, it goes on and on and on, each topic, of course, into so many different branches. But tonight I just wanted to just mention the fact that years and years ago, like 20-odd years, and back in even longer than that, and to the early 90s, the different topics that we're discussing were getting laughed at by the public, who won't believe anything until an authority figure tells them. And they've been trained who the authority figures are. In every country, they have mainstream ones, main ones for the news. They have been grown up with, and out they come, and they just read what's been scripted for them, but you'll believe it, and you'll parrot it, and you'll do what you're told. But if anyone else tells you years and years in advance and shows you all the proof, most folks simply just turn away. They don't believe it. Even if it's from the sources themselves or from the government, they don't want to read it, they won't read it. So you can't go out and expect everyone to understand, or care for that matter. That's the true nature of humanity. They know precisely it's only a small minority who ever have that spark in them to inquire and to find out and dig into what's going on. The rest of the public are under a form of hypnosis most of the time, between fact and fiction, especially today. They're so overloaded with fiction, blended with the things that are happening, so it's all mushed together, that whatever happens, it's all predictive programming for the next step to them, and they accept it even more easily. It says here, the next million years prevail, in page 114, Charles Galton Darwin, over the operations of pure chance. Thus a creed may have the rudiment of the quality possessed by the genes of mankind, of being able to produce a permanent effect on humanity. If the history of the future is not regarded as the automatic unfolding of a sequence of uncontrollable events, and few of us would accept this inevitability, then anyone who has decided what measures are desirable for the permanent betterment of his fellows will naturally have to consider what is the best method of carrying his policy through. Now think about what he's saying there, of who's deciding what's better for you, right? It says, and will naturally have to consider what is the best method of carrying his policy through. There are three levels at which he might work. The first and weakest is by direct conscious political action. His policy is likely to die with him, and so to be ineffective. The second is by the creation of a creed, since this has the prospect of lasting for quite a number of generations. By creed, it's almost like a religion in a sense. You can create, now, sustainability and biodiversity, all this kind of thing, that's a creed. It was designed to be a creed and promoted as a religion. Gorbachev himself said that. He said, we have to create a form of world religion based on the environment and greening and so on, he said. He said, a form of earth worship. Well, look at all the well-funded and trained NGO leaders with all their followers out there who've all been brainwashed at school for their purpose. They don't know that. They think they've come to conclusions by themselves, by the particular selected videos and so on that have been shown through classrooms year after year and so on. Armies of them have been created. So again, back to this article from the 1950s, from a book written by Charles Galton Darwin. It says, his policy is the first and weakest is by direct conscious political action. His policy is likely to die with him, and so to be ineffective. The second is by the creation of a creed, since this has the prospect of lasting for quite a number of generations, so that there is some prospect of really changing the world. So he's ruled out politics because it's too changeable, you see. He's telling you a creed is above the political system, and that's what you're seeing now. You don't vote for all these NGOs out there, do you? So a creed could last for quite a few generations. So it's a religion, and here's the tenets of religion. You're all bad. There's too many of you. Blah blah. We have to save the environment, to save what's left of us. Yada 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 yada, and sterilize us. All the wrong folk too. It says, so that there is some prospect of really changing the world a little with the creed. The third would be directly changing man's nature, working through the laws of biological heredity. And if this could be done for long enough, it would be really effective. But even if we knew all about man's genes, which we certainly do not, that was back then, a policy of this kind would be almost impossible to enforce, even for a short time. And since it would take many generations to carry it through, it would be almost certainly be dropped long before any perceptible effects were achieved. That is why creeds are so tremendously important for the future. A creed gives the best practical hope that a policy will endure well beyond the life of its author. And so it gives the best practical hope that man can have for really controlling his future fate. Now, you could add into that, they have certainly done an awful lot with the genes now. There's another article in the paper, again, from the Journal for American Medical Association, with a study done in Canada, I think it was. I'll put them up to the links from them, where you can read for yourselves the studies from, about fluoride. Again, talking about this years and years ago, and folk would laugh at you. And yes, it does drop the IQ and cause many, many problems, especially, by the way, in the male. Now, just to end, because the time's running out already, it's rather sad in a sense, but I only picked this to talk about the last minute. I was just going to touch on it. But it's too interesting. Charles Galton Darwin is rather blatant about the agenda. And he got away with it, and he was praised for it too by all the elite of the day. If you get the original book with the cover on the hardback, it's got all the praises from all the top people in the country at the time and in the world. By top, I mean powerful and wealthy, etc., etc., and those who had the right to implement all these different agendas. Well, in the 1950s, remember, this was written. I think what followed it. Now, he was on one person in massive think tanks, huge think tanks, that even met during World War II to decide on how to depopulate or reduce the population of the world after the war ended. So in the 1950s, out comes this book, and which is like, I'm sure many of the people contributed to it who were on the different think tanks and so on with him. And come the late 50s, you had the change in the morality rather quickly with the types of music and movies that flooded out into the 60s. Suddenly you had the promotion of sex like never before. And from that, you had the National Health Services immediately taking care of unwanted pregnancies. So sex without limits, really. To do it, and they actually printed books on it of the need to destroy the bonding process of man and woman, so that sex would be simply for gratification and release of the sexual urges, and without bonding. Bonding was to be destroyed. Well, look at what happened in the West, until hardly anybody can get on with anybody else for any length of time anyway now. Very effective warfare strategy. And the populations have plummeted in the Western countries. Interesting, isn't it? That the people like Galton Darwin and so on literally would target their own nation and their own nations first. There's a big story behind all of that, naturally. But they tested it all out in their domestic populations before they'd apply it to the world. In fact, they haven't applied it to the whole world yet, really, not all of it. That's interesting itself too. They're still using the population growth in Africa as a big fear thing for the West. Oh my God, that the whole world's too many folk in the world. Wait a minute here. If you're doing your best in your own backyard, why should you suffer for what's happening elsewhere? See, you've got a collective responsibility. That's what they're training you for. It doesn't matter what you do that's good. It's not enough. It'll never be enough. And they want your obedience across the world in the same global program. That's what it's about. Now, Charles Galton Darwin also, let's get off this for a minute or finish up with him, and he mentions the fact that those who guide the world have to retain all of their faculties and intellect. They must be wild men, because they're planning it all, implementing it all, and running the planet like the captain of a ship. That's how the analogy uses. But he tells you that they'd have to dumb down and sterilize the general population who wouldn't have the intellect after certain techniques were used on them, and wouldn't have the IQ. That's all happened, people. This is a top scientist here talking. who's lauded across the world. He didn't do this because it's his hobby. He didn't write the book because it's a kind of an eccentric hobby that he's got or something. I hope you understand that. Most folk never get past that. Oh, it must be just his particular opinions. No, it's not just his opinions. You're talking about one of the rulers here, who mixed with all the biochemists and all the rest of them who are hard at work too, with Bertrand Russell and many others, right up to the present time. They helped to design the culture that would help destroy society that the people had just been fighting for through different wars. And most folk won't read it, unfortunately. They'd rather look at fiction or science fiction or something and be gratified by all the incredible programming you get in it all today. It's astonishing, but it works in people. And people are now afraid to give their opinions on different topics because you are being punished for having opinions which have been turned upside down in a very short period of time of new normals. I'll put up some articles at the end now to try and get it through. I mentioned before about how they're all families. You wonder why this is all news now. All the different couples in the royal families in Britain and so on. And it's because, you see, they have public relations companies. Each couple has a public relations company of their own type that vies for ratings to make them popular. It's just all show business, people. It's show business. This is what it is. And Prince Harry and Meghan hire a social media expert to boost their popularity as they trail just 700,000 followers behind Wills and Kate. And they actually have games with each other in little bets to see who can get more hits that week, whatever, on the fake stories that they put out. And it actually make them like dramas, because people get sucked into them. And they know this. They've said that the women who like soap operas get sucked right into these things, and it personalizes these people that they'll never meet. It makes them seem real to them and like members of their family, you see. It's all science, and it's all fake. Queensland government says it owns rainfall since it hits the ground on your property. So there it goes. Again, the sustainability organizations and different laws they put across the world, from the United Nations, naturally, about the fact that, and the United Nations gives you all your building laws and your codes for all kinds of things, electric and building and house and construction, everything now. Everything. Did you ever vote for the UN? No, you won't, because you see, it's not democratic. It's meant to take over governance of the world without you voting for it. Much like the EU top bureau that runs it all, and for the Europe, the people above the politicians. The politicians can't pass laws, by the way. It's the commissars above them who do all of that. The people that you don't vote for. So Queensland and other countries too are being told the same thing, really. You see, rainfall, it's not yours. It's not yours. And they give you all these different articles trying to convince you that it's not yours, and why you can't see it as yours, you know. Technically, you see, you're part of a big beehive or an anthill. Galton Darwin talks about in those terms too. You're like an anthill, and there's different kinds of superior and inferior types of ants. So that's what you're getting trained to believe for yourself. A US article too, just showing you how the military is all getting geared for it too. And when they get turned loose on a major crisis, like a massive financial plan collapse, if it collapses, it'll be planned, folks, because they could keep the money con going forever just by adding zeros to computer numbers in federal central banks. So it's really a form of control, you see. But the Department of Defense are not supporting a formal mission dedicated to global change research, talking about climate change, is developing policies and plans to manage and respond to the effects of climate change on Department of Defense missions, assets, and the operational environment. But it's also domestic as well, folks. Various research agencies within DoD sponsor and undertake basic research activities that concurrently satisfy both national security requirements as well as the strategic goals of the USG CRP. And they give you all the different departments involved in it, and DARPA, etc., etc. Just to get you all used to the idea that they must get a big crisis going to bring out the global governance into its full position across the whole planet. And only under a crisis situation will you accept it, you see. You'll be terrified. They'll make you terrified, and you'll plead for them to save you. Well, here's what you give up in the process, and they'll give you a whole list of things for your own safety, understand. Again, article, Fluoride in drinking water is safe. A new study reignites a long-standing debate, published by Journal for American Medical Association Pediatrics, giving new life to a long-running debate whether adding fluoride to drinking water is a prudent way to prevent tooth decay or potential toxic mistake. Now, it's a drug, folks. And it isn't the only one they're putting in your drinking water. Remember the articles from a few years ago, they want to put in lithium, which they give to bipolars, to steady it, make us more placid for a mood, you see, make us more happy. I was looking for a happy drug for you, make you happy. And compliant, naturally, is actually more important. But you can't be compliant unless you're happy. So make you happy first. Even when you shouldn't be, like Aldous Huxley mentioned. So I'll put these articles up. Most people, again, don't want to know these things. They've been taught to be egocentric and egocentronic to an extent, not to like that which is pleasing, but to turn away from anything which makes them upset. Oh, I don't want to hear about that. It's not nice. Well, neither is a train coming up behind you, or a vehicle for that matter. You should always know about it. That's common sense. Animals all have those instincts. They don't deny them or they'd all be dead as they eat each other, etc. And Britain faces a Big Brother surveillance society worse than George Orwell's 1984. Lip-reading cameras. So they're reading your lips. And they've been doing it for quite a few years, actually. That will force people to talk with hands over mouths. Our latest attacks on privacy, government watchdog warns. The UK has more CCTV cameras per person than any other country on earth. Don't forget, that's they keep saying that's the home of democracy. So it says the Metropolitan Police Service is trialling facial recognition cameras in London, and software already exists which can identify people caught on camera by their gait, by their walking, and make out their words using lip-reading technology. It says people could be left cupping their hands over their mouths to try to keep conversations private. He warned that the tight legal framework which limits the government's use of covert surveillance doesn't apply to new technologies, yeah, sure, which can be deployed in public spaces, and called for better regulation. Actually, they have that stuff in China too. It's a rollout. Remember, China is the model state for the whole world to copy. They praised China, according to the United Nations, and all their agencies. This is nothing new. It's not conspiracy theory. It's fact. All countries have admitted that at the United Nations when they've gone there and for their talks, that China is a model state for the world to copy, to follow. So I'm not surprised by the fact, but China admitted they've got all these facial recognition glasses even, which the police can wear in railway stations in different places. They put out little documentaries about it. Up comes your name as they watch you passing by, even in the distance, they can recognize you, and your name pops up and your social insurance number and everything else. That's it. That's you. And that's your new freedom, by the way. That's what George Bush Jr. mentioned. The new freedom. They were going to give you the new freedom. And of course, they didn't give any of the public a rundown on what they meant by the new freedom while you're living in it, folks. And it's less freedom. It's a political correct freedom where you're left alone. If you parrot all the stuff you're told to parrot, and you're good, and you don't upset the apple cart by having self-thought and self-thinking opinions and decisions and so on. All those bad things, own think, We're here, we really are here, and it's going to get a lot worse as they ramp it through. Every step backwards that you take leads to a dozen more, and they get faster and faster. That's the nature of what the bully uses in his power system. The bully always uses the same techniques on you. One step back, it leads to a dozen more at a time, more, boom, until you're running backwards to comply. To be independent people, you've got to stand up individually as an independent person, not as some kind of ant in an anthill like Galton Darwin talked about, Charles Galton Darwin. And remember too, if you cover your face, you eventually have police come up to you, because you're not supposed to hide your face according to the different anti-terrorist laws and so on. So cupping your hand might seem, what are you saying? We have the right to know everything that you're saying in public, you see. Do you understand where it all is already? George Orwell had his character Winston going round a little part in his tiny little apartment to try to hide from the cameras to write his diary. We're here. And folk are not afraid of it. Okay. We go with a whimper, not with a bang. Remember that one? I'll put up now, what else? You find that the Bank of England, Mark Carney, who was previously the Bank of Canada, they move them around the planet now, eh? The head of it, the Bank of England's head, urges replacing the dollar with a Libra-like reserve currency. So it's all coming along nicely, because all the Federal Reserves of all countries, all the central banking systems are all linked together into one club. They're really one ownership in a sense, to be honest with you. If you really delve into it and do enough digging, you'll find that. And you must get a unified system across the planet to control the public. As I say, money is just a control system. And they can create very good front men tomorrow to lead you, to have you all follow them, say that they're geniuses, and apparently appear to be the owner of massive corporations with billions behind them. They can make them instantly today. It's quite easy to do, and they have done it quite a lot recently. But that's how it's done, for those who haven't caught on to it. You find that the trouble with Hong Kong, of course, they've got Australia's expecting a rush of Hong Kong millionaires to flood into Australia now, try and get out of the situations as China reasserts its authority over Hong Kong. I'm always interested when you see more and more exercises, domestic exercises for unrest at home. And they really started this again in the late 90s. Because they knew the war was going to step up and across the Middle East with 9/11 before 9/11 happened, folks. They even passed laws in Canada. It was an omnibus crime bill, which was really an anti-terrorist bill, before 9/11 happened, a couple of years before it. Everybody at the top knew what the big agenda was going to be, regardless of with having wars and who against whom, etc. They started having exercises at home as well. Rather blatant ones, claiming it was for wars overseas. They were using mock attacks on some cities and so on. Anyway, there's an article here in North Carolina, special warfare exercises kept under the radar in North Carolina, known as Robin Sage Training. The unconventional warfare exercises are like live action role-playing in the extreme, with hostile engagement between special forces, students, volunteers, civilians, and soldiers out of Fort Bragg. It begins August the 30th. So they include gunfire with blanks staged across 21 North Carolina counties. It says, and the Army is telling the public not to be alarmed at suspicious-looking activity. They even have, I know from previous exercise, they even have fake terrorists dressed as civilians going up amongst the public trying to stir up. It's quite something else, to get as realistic as possible. And it says heavily populated counties like Wake, Cumberland, and Union counties are among training sites, according to U.S. Army John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center, Fort Bragg. The students will match wits with more seasoned soldiers who will act as realistic opposing force and guerrilla freedom fighters, officials said in a release. Every country does these now, these special things. In fact, some of are in Europe, you find that they've used different European troops across places like Scotland and some places in the past years. So they'll use them when the time is right, you see. And unfortunately, I've rushed through a few things. I had a whole bunch of things I wanted to talk about. I never get around to things I want to talk about, and it's kind of sad. But you must sometimes let your brain have its way, or let the spirit have its way as to where it's going to take you. But I tell people, for all the bad news, don't go into it if you can't handle bad news. Don't get angry. Don't get angry by people who are set out there to be leaders for you, whose sole job is to make you angry, or make you to react or do silly things and so on. This is the world in which we live, and the world is not... you definitely have evil in the world, or as a force, there's no doubt about it. I have no problem recognizing that. And you have to accept that there are evil people who are often very respectable people in a system which praises money, wealth, and power. But you don't have to be part of them. But you can always be aware of things too. And hopefully, that means that's all you've had down through generations, is information passed on by a few for another bunch of the few to come for each generation to keep it alive. Otherwise, you've been conquered long ago, folks. I mean, completely. The agenda would have been accomplished completely long ago. But right now is completing a phase of it very quickly, and you have to be on hyper alert, I would say, because there's definitely a crash being planned about taking us down to the next step. So anyway, for those out there who have been following me for years, remember you can buy the books and disc at cuttingthroughthematrix.com. Make sure you list the sites I have on the cuttingthroughthematrix.com site in case anything happens to any one of them. And hopefully you can continue to get my talks. And remember too, you can also donate to me. And you can see how to do it at cuttingthroughthematrix.com. Different methods. From myself, Alan Watchman, Ontario, Canada, good night. May your God or your gods go with you.